There we go. So we're recording. But again, John is serving as my co-host. So if you have comments or anything to share, please feel free to do so. Like I said, we were introduced last week to Nehemiah. We kind of made the comparison even last week between Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra, the scribe, the priest. Nehemiah, the regular guy, the servant, describes himself as the cupbearer to the king. These two books, I don't know if I mentioned this before or not, but Ezra and Nehemiah in the original Hebrew text were just one book. So this flows straight from Ezra's time into Nehemiah's time. We're at about 445 BC here, 90 years beyond the work of Ezra in rebuilding the temple, organizing the people. So, I mean, the people have been here a long time. This is very much a work in progress here. And as we were introduced to Nehemiah, one of the things we saw about him is that Nehemiah is a man of prayer and a man of faith. We saw that opening prayer, if you would, in chapter 1, verses 5 through 11, where Nehemiah hears about the condition of Jerusalem, and he's just heartbroken about it. And he has that, or he shares that long prayer. He prays to God, and it's a prayer of confession and a prayer of dependence on God. And then we see in chapter 2, verse 4, when he gets that moment there with King Artaxerxes, that real quick prayer, that just, stop on a dime, say, God help me, and just go with it, right there. But both of those, just great prayers. And we mentioned last week, those two are two of 12 prayers in the book. But we see that he's a man of prayer. He's a man who is given over to God. And in that, we see in his faith, he has the faith to wait on God. He has the faith to ask. And he had the faith to challenge the people. We talked quite a bit, I think, about waiting on God, that whole idea of knowing that God's in charge, knowing that God is in control of the plan, and it's his plan. But also in that waiting, Nehemiah had a plan. He knew, it was 4 months from the time he heard to the time he had the opportunity to talk to the king. But he says, here's what we need. I need the permission of the king to ask these various rulers for the supplies that we need. He had it all figured out. He was ready. He didn't just wait around and just wait in despair, not knowing what to do. He had a plan. And when he had that opportunity, he asked the king correctly, and he asked for the supplies that he needed. He knew what he needed. And then as we get into chapter 2, we see this whole, once he surveys Jerusalem, he does a kind of a clandestine view during the night, and he sees that there's work to be done. So he challenges the people, and he knows that through all of this, God is with him. In chapter 2, verse 8, we see that great that phrase where Nehemiah says, the hand of my God was with me. And then in chapter 2, verse 12, he says that God had put this plan on his heart. So he is a man completely dependent, completely faithful to God. He's prepared for the challenge that he's going to put in front of the people, but he's also prepared himself. Just, we talked about that with Ezra, that Ezra had a prepared heart. Well, so did Nehemiah, that he's ready to put this before the people. But we also see that even though he has this plan, he has an idea of what he wants to do, he also is a man who is completely given to the idea that if the Lord wills, we'll do these things. Let's go back. I'm messing this up here. That he has this idea, or he has this understanding that all of this is in God's hands. Look back at chapter 1, Nehemiah chapter 1. Look at verse 11. In this prayer, he says, "Please, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant, to that of your servants who delight to revere your name. Give your servant success today, and grant him compassion in the presence of this man." So he says, God, we're asking you for this help. Those of us who trust you, this is something we're laying in your hands. We know that you'll be the one to see us through with all this. Then in chapter 2, verse 20, we're kind of skipping ahead here, but he gives the same idea when the work that they're doing is challenged by Sanballat and Tobias. I gave them this reply, verse 20. The God of heaven is the one who will grant us success. We, his servants, will start building, but you have no right, no share, or historic claim in Jerusalem. Again, he says, it's God who's going to get us through this. That we have a plan, we have people willing to work, we're ready to jump into this, but ultimately, it is God who's going to get us through this. And in that, in his example, or by his example, his complete devotion to God, he inspires the people. I mean, he walks around the city, he sees that it's a mess, and he comes back, and we see this in at the end, or there in the middle of chapter 2, verse 17. He said, so I said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned. Come, let us rebuild Jerusalem's wall so that we will no longer be a disgrace. Now, that could have been offensive. I mean, people could have had their feelings hurt by that, but because they see what kind of man he is, it inspires the people instead. And how do we know this? We know this because of what we see in verse 18. Their response to him right after that sentence, they said, let's start rebuilding. And their hands were strengthened to do this good work. They said, we're ready to build. We're ready to do this. Now, as we talk about some of the lessons that we can take from Nehemiah's leadership, from the expression of trust that he shows in God, we think of this idea of let us rise up and build, let our hands be strengthened for the work. What can that mean for us today? We're not talking about us as members of this congregation physically building a building. Now, in some ways we kind of are, but I think that's kind of down the road now. But what we're talking about is we're building, or we're doing our part in this process of building up, of raising up. This whole concept of this class, this return and rebuild, this idea of you and I, as members of this congregation, rising up and putting our shoulders to the work. It means that we're going to take on whatever challenges are in front of us. Richard has mentioned the last couple of Sunday mornings. I hope you've caught on. I hope you've seen this. This lookingforanswers.net. It's a revamp, and I think I mentioned this last week too. A revamp of our comeandsee.fyi. It's just a way to promote an easy channel for people to get to the World Bible School self-guided Bible studies. But that's a work that we can be a part of, whether it's hand out those business cards or those mailer cards, or put a bumper sticker on your car, or just be willing to talk to people about it. We can see their approach to this challenge, and we can be inspired. Now, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I imagine some of you have, I know I've talked with some of our other members about this. Richard and Jared and I have talked about this some. Our challenge as we gradually move back to meeting together is going to be a great challenge. I mean, this whole idea of rising up and reaching out and reaching into the community, that's all part of it, but we have to rebuild ourselves. I mean, we're going to have to reach out to those members who aren't, I'm not talking about those who aren't ready to come back because of the concerns about the virus. I get all that. But there's going to be a spirit of complacency in some people. People have gotten used to not having to be anywhere on Sunday morning, not having to be anywhere at a certain time on Sunday night or Wednesday night. That's just natural. But there's going to be a challenge to rise people back up to just the assembling together, to getting ourselves back on the same page as far as our worship together, much less the hard work of getting out and actually sharing the message. So we have so much to do. And it honestly, I believe is going to be a greater challenge now than it's been in recent years. So why do we do this? Why do we go about this work that is a challenge, this work that is difficult for each of us, that is, uncomfortable for some of us? Well, the reason we do the hard work is the same reason that these people in Nehemiah did the hard work. That our job, our effort is to glorify God. That what we want to do is to let the people around us know, to remind each other, of course, but then to let the people around us know that everything we do is done to glorify God. Nehemiah reminds the people of this over and over, that this is God's work that they're involved with. Chapter 1, verse 11, we've looked at. 2, verse 20, we've looked at. Look over in chapter 4. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 9. So we prayed to our God and stationed a guard because of them day and night, invoking God into the work. We'll get to this probably in a week or two, what they're being guarded about. But chapter 4, verse 14. After I made an inspection, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord and fight for your countrymen. He's reminding them, this is what we're doing is because we want God to receive the honor. We need to be reminded that God's on our side, but the work we're doing, the work they're doing is not just to build this structure for them to worship in. The work that we're doing in, I guess, in effect, reassembling our congregation, rebuilding our congregation, is not just to fill the building back up. It's because we need each other. Richard talked about that some this morning too, that we need that unity. We need that body to serve together, not just because of us, but in our being together, our serving together, that glorifies God. And we need to be reminded about that. We need to be focused on that work. One of the things that I think is kind of a challenge for this congregation in some ways. We're a successful congregation. I mean, a lot of you have been here a lot of years and maybe don't realize that. I mean, Richard mentioned that this morning. The by and large, the average congregation is under 100 people. So I think he said 90-something% is 65 or something like that and under. We're incredibly blessed. This congregation has grown from whatever it was when that first group started, the Meridian congregation, to where we are now, averaging, pre-pandemic, averaging 350, 330, whatever it is, every Sunday morning. We're a successful congregation. Congregations in our area, look at the work that we're able to do and are just, are so happy that we have a lectureship, that we host youth rallies, that we do all the different things that we do, because there's a lot of congregations who aren't able to do those things. But we have to remember that it's not about us. It's not about having a great history. It's not about having a great heritage. It's about glorifying God. And that's what Nehemiah reminds these people about over and over, that this is God doing this work. We're doing this because God's allowing us. We're doing this because God helps us. The flip side of that, maybe not realizing how successful we are, is that when we do realize that we're a pretty successful congregation, it can become easy to kind of rest on our laurels and say, look what we've accomplished. We went from this group of whatever it was, 30, 40 people in the 90s to this group of 350 in the Northwest. That's an incredible accomplishment. Look at us. We can't get that way either. We can never get to the point where we're satisfied with who we are, because again, it's not about us. It's about making sure that God is glorified and that we're working to serve his purpose. When Nehemiah gets these people, when he goes and he makes this inspection of the city and comes back and tells them, we got to fix this so we're not a disgrace. The people are ready to build. And what's so great about this, if you look in chapter 3, I'm not going to read through the whole chapter, but what we see is that when we realize that our focus is doing God's work, what we also see is that even in our congregations, God uses all kinds of people. God will use anybody who has the desire to work. That's another thing that I find incredibly unique about Linder Road, is that we have people from the South. We have people who have lived here all their lives. We have people from California, from the West Coast. We have people from all over the place. We have people from very diverse backgrounds, very diverse upbringings. Obviously, of course, we have men, women, kids, all that. Different people of different talents, different abilities. You look through chapter 3, and I mean, just briefly going through here, chapter 3, verse 1, you see the priests at work. Verse 5, you see the Tekoites. They're nobles, not quite. We'll get to them. Get down to verse 8, goldsmith, the perfumer. Verse 12, Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem. He made repairs. He and his daughter. So he's got the family involved. You skip down to verse 16, Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, a different Nehemiah, ruler of half the district of Beth Zur. Verse 17, the Levites, all different kinds of people from all different walks of life, all different talent levels. They just decide it's time to work. And they work, I mean, you read through there too, they worked at the Valley Gate, they worked at the Fish Gate, some of them worked at the Dung Gate. You know, I'd be raising my hand for the Valley or the Fish Gate before I do the other one. But people of all different kinds, people from all different perspectives worked at all kinds of different jobs. What made them ready to work? It was, I mean, Levites don't have any talent at wall building. I mean, not any specific talent. The guy that was the ruler of half the district and his daughters, it wasn't their thing probably to be wall builders, but what they had was a desire. I mean, for you and I, when it comes to, you know, teaching class, and, you know, right now, especially when I read through this chapter, honestly, John McCarthy, my co-host, I think of John, because John's having a challenge right now, even with 2 services, trying to get people to lead prayers, to be a part of just the various roles that need to be filled. Well, some of you gentlemen who aren't used to leading prayers or being a part of reading scriptures or what, this is your time to put your shoulders to the work, because John needs your help in our service. We all need each other's help. And again, what it comes down to is the desire to do it. Lord willing, as we progress, we're going to need Bible class teachers again. We're going to need nursery helpers again. Lord willing, someday we're going to have things like Vacation Bible School and those things again. We're going to need workers. And what makes the difference is people of all kinds ready to work, just like we see here in Nehemiah chapter 3. But we also see the truth about it is that when it comes to the work of the church, when it comes to any work, but the work of the church, we know for a fact that some just won't do any work, and some will do more than others. Some will allow others to do all the work. You've probably heard the 80-20 principle, that in church work, that 20% of people do 80% of the work. And, you know, I don't know if there's, you know, research behind that or not, but I mean, the fact is you kind of see it happening. Look at chapter 2, verse 18. Well, we saw that people said, let's start rebuilding. Their hands were strengthened to do this good work. But I mentioned these folks a minute ago, verse 5 of chapter 3. Beside them, the Tekoites made repairs, but their nobles did not lift a finger to help their supervisors. How would you like to be those people? I mean, in this chapter listing people working shoulder to shoulder at different jobs, different work, outside their comfort zones, but the Tekoite nobles are singled out as being people who weren't ready to do the work. Now, what we also know is that some work goes unseen. You know, when you look at these people in this chapter doing these various jobs, doing this working in various places, rebuilding the wall, not everybody knew what everybody was doing. And not everybody was working on the main city gate where, you know, hold the biggest gate, the most recognized gate. People working in all kinds of different places. We have the exact same situation. We'll have some people working behind the scenes. We have Bible class teachers. We have Bible class helpers. We have people who just sit in it and are trying to learn how to teach a Bible class. There's work to be done if people will step up and do it. You may have heard somebody say, I really like good, hard work. I could sit and watch people do it all day. Yeah, see, that is not what we need. What we need is people who are willing to step in and say, I've never done this before, but I'm willing to try. And again, especially right now, because we're going to have a real interesting transition to getting back to what we consider normal, right? Getting back to where we're fully staffed with Bible classes and teachers and things like that. So it's going to require some of us to put our shoulders to the work and take on building a fish gate like we've never built one before. But the fact is, when we look at Nehemiah leading these people, inspiring these people to work, even though each of them probably had some doubts, some, I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure how to do this. What they had to remember, and what we have to remember, is that God has placed us right where he wants us. This group that came back, for whatever reason, wasn't the group that came back to work on the temple. They're years later. They were happy in Babylon, or they were content with where they were. For whatever reason, they hadn't come back yet. But God had a plan even for those people. Even though, like I said, these guys who are rulers of half of a region are now slinging a hammer trying to rebuild a wall. That wasn't, that might not have been what they envisioned when it was time for them to come back to Jerusalem. What they may have thought is they'd come back, some other people would build the wall, and they'd kind of sit around and look at it, and they'd all kind of relish in their Jewishness. But God has them right where he wants them for this reason. In fact, we'll see Nehemiah even address this a little bit. You think of all these different gates. There's the sheep gate, fish gate, the valley gate, the dung gate, the fountain gate, the water gate. Again, not all of these guys are at, not all of these groups of people are working at the same job. And not all these jobs are glamorous. It's not a very, I imagine it's how do I say this? An unpleasant experience to be working at some of those gates. But all the work is necessary. Paul, when he's closing out the book of the first letter of the church at Corinth, in chapter 15, he's this great chapter about the resurrection and all this. Verse 58, listen to what he says. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in what? In the Lord's work, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. I imagine for these people working on these different gates, working on rebuilding the wall, stuff they'd never done before, I imagine there were some times where they're like, what are we doing? We have a temple here. Let's go look in the temple. It's got all this stuff in it. But there's a reason God had them working on and where they were working. And that's what Paul says. Be steadfast in the work of the Lord, knowing that whatever you're doing, whether it's assisting in a Bible class, whether it's working in the sound booth, whether it's preaching from the pulpit or teaching a classroom, whatever it is, I believe that God doesn't see any job as more important than the others. And God needs all of us to step up and be a part of the work that needs to be done. And again, I feel like I need to reiterate, probably now in the coming months more than ever, because we're going to have limited people to fill the same number of roles. Yeah, we're going to adjust some things a little bit, but as things open up gradually, Lord willing, we will have jobs that need to be filled that are going to be a challenge. You see, I think I had a comment come in here. Yeah, comment says there are roles in every congregation that not everyone can fill, but everyone is responsible for building the spiritual house of God, just like everyone took part in building the walls of Jerusalem, regardless of their talents or lack thereof. That's exactly right. That as Christians, we're all called the stones that build up the house of God. We all have a responsibility to be a part of the progress. All of us have a responsibility to be a part of that work. Any other thoughts? Any other comments here? We're going to kind of shift gears here a minute.
Hey, Clint, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I find a statement I heard recently is the new normal nothing is normal and everything is new. And if you treat things as if this is the first time you started a congregation, that's your new set of eyes, not in the aspect of worship, because that always will remain the same. But everything else is almost like we're just new together. And you almost have to ignore some of the history. You don't want to completely, but quite a change that we're going through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is, I mean, in fact, I saw an article a week or so ago that right now every congregation is a startup. You know, every congregation is to some degree a plant. Because I mean, you look at us this morning. I mean, Richard even mentioned it this morning. You look around, there's 45, 50 people in there. That's what a lot of congregations begin as, and that's kind of where we're going to be for the next however long it's going to be. So yeah, we have to kind of forget about, well, I've always done this. I've always had things this way. Well, if, you know, I shared with somebody, I guess I was talking with John this morning, that I talked with somebody in my family yesterday that said, you know, through these times, they've been doing the same thing we're doing right now, Zoom Bible class. And he said, I've been asked to lead prayers in almost every Zoom class because I'm willing to do it. He goes, you know, when we were meeting together as a body in the building in his situation, you know, 1,000 people almost. So, you know, I hardly ever led a prayer. He said, but now I do it all the time because things are different, because we got to forget about, like we just said, we got to forget about the, whatever you call it, the previous normal, because everything is new now. And again, there is no normal. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, jumping into chapter 4 now, is the people, like I said, the people are doing the work, and the work is being done. And as we shift into this, we're going to see some opposition, and our opposition is going to be the same people. It's going to be Sanballat and Tobiah. Look back in chapter 2. This is where we see their first issue. And we talked about this some last week. Verse 19, chapter 2, verse 19. When Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about this, heard about them rebuilding the wall. They mocked and despised us and said, what is this you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? So what they're saying is, you don't have permission to do this. This is a joke anyway. Well, little did they know, or they found out, I guess, that they did actually have permission from the king. And as we finish up chapter 3, as we go through all those groups of people working at different jobs in different ways, the project is well underway. The wall is being rebuilt. But look now back in chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, because here they come again. Verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious. He mocked the Jews before his colleagues and the powerful men of Samaria and said, what are these pathetic Jews doing? Can they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they ever finish it? Can they bring these burnt stones back to life from the mounds of rubble? Then Tobiah the Ammonite, who was beside him, said, indeed, even if a fox climbed up what they were building, he would break down their stone wall. Now, I don't know how you feel when you read that, but just imagine that what was the gentleman's name? That you're Shalom. You're one of Shalom's daughters. Your dad is a noble. Your dad is a high-ranking official. He owns a lot of property. You're working, doing something, rebuilding the wall that maybe you've never done before. And along come these guys, and you hear them saying what we just read. How would that make you feel? Well, if you're human, that nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear yourself being ridiculed. Nobody wants to hear the work you're doing being ridiculed. They're making fun of what the Jews are doing. And in spite of all that, the work continues. The work keeps going. In verses 4 and 5, now this isn't specifically stated as Nehemiah prayed, but let's just read it. It's obviously a prayer, so this becomes prayer number 3. Verse 4, he says, "Listen, our God, for we are despised. Make their insults return on their own heads, and let them be taken as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt or let their sins be erased from your sight, because they have angered the builders." Again, Nehemiah hands this all over to God. It's maybe a little more salty than Nehemiah usually is. And really, you can compare this to some of David's imprecatory prayers, where David says, "God, I'm asking you to take care of my enemies, take these people out, get these people out of my life." But look at verse 6. I mean, even in the face of this ridicule, the face of this harassment, verse 6, this is a great verse, chapter 4, verse 6. "So we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined up together to half its height. And here's why: for the people had the will to keep working." Even in the face of this, you see this on your screen, these people, that's a mental image that I get from Sanballat and Tobiah. In the face of that, these people kept working. They kept getting the work done. The work was successful because the people had a mind to work. Now, if you've been in the church very long, you've heard this expression, you've probably heard this preached before. What does that mean? What does it mean when the people have a mind to work? Well, look at the context of what's going on here. What it tells us, number one, they will not be distracted. That they are totally focused on getting this work done. And again, I have to believe that it's a great deal of it is attributed to Nehemiah's leadership, because he is this faithful man. He is this man of prayer, and they see this about him. And he's committed to God and committed to the works. Therefore, the people with this mind to work, they're also committed to the work, to getting the work done. So the people stay focused on the work. But look at what happens with our antagonists here, verses 7 through 9. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, Ammonites, and Ashdodites heard that the repair to the walls of Jerusalem was progressing and that the gaps were being closed, they became furious. They didn't like it at all. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw it into confusion. So, again, look at what Nehemiah's response is. "So we prayed to our God and stationed a guard because of them day and night." I mentioned this verse earlier where they stationed the guard. This is why. Because Sanballat and Tobiah and their cohorts have decided we're going to come here and cause problems. Nehemiah says, let's get together and let's pray about this. Because of that, the people have a mind to work. The people are still ready to do the job. And again, the way Nehemiah approaches it is he prays about it. He goes to God in prayer. He says that he's going to let God handle this. This is going to be up to God. But as we've already seen, when we're talking about him waiting on God, he doesn't just pray, "God, take care of this," and do nothing. They act upon it. They set a guard. In a former congregation I was in, I challenged our congregation. I said, a lot of times, we get up and we say our prayer, or our public prayers, our closing prayers, or whatever. We say, "God, we really want to expand your kingdom. We really want to, we really want to save souls. We want to save the lost." And I asked them, "What are we doing about it? I mean, are we expecting people just to walk in the door and just sit down and say, 'Please baptize me'?" It didn't go over incredibly well, but that's a reality. That we can't just pray, "God, send us lost people," and have them just jump in the baptistry. What Nehemiah does here is says, these people are going to come be a harassment. They're going to bother us, but we have a mind to work. We're going to hand this over to God, but we have to do our part too. So they set up the guard. Now, look at verse 10. In Judah it was said, the strength of the laborer fails, since there is so much rubble. We will never be able to rebuild the wall. So what do we have now? We have whiners, people who are saying, this isn't going to work. We have enemies all around us. We also have people in the camp who don't think we can get this done. Now, verse 11 and 12. And our enemies said, they won't realize it until we're among them and can kill them and stop the work. When the Jews who lived nearby arrived, they said to us time and time again, everywhere we turn, they attack us. So there's rumors being spread. It's the opposition is continual, and it's coming from within and without. So let's keep going here with this. Verse 13, so I stationed people behind the lowest sections of the wall at the vulnerable areas. I stationed them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. So he says, okay, we got to get people. We need the Johnsons, the Smiths, the Joneses, everybody go here. You guys get in this wall, get in this section, and you guard it as a family, which is just a really cool concept. But anyway, let's keep going. After I made an inspection, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord, and fight for your countrymen, your sons and daughters, your wives and homes. I mean, that's a powerful statement. I mean, that's a movie scene right there where he says, you go with your families, and yes, you defend this wall, but you defend this wall because you're standing there with your sons and your daughters and your wives, and you're defending your homes. So the opposition that is working so hard to destroy the spirit of the people, what we'll see is it can't break this mind to work. It can't get them away from that. So in verses 16 and 17, well, verse 15, so when our enemies heard that we knew their scheme, that God had frustrated it, again, God gets the credit. Every one of us returned to his own work on the wall. Now listen to verse 16. From that day on, half of my men did the work while the other half held spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers supported all of the people of Judah who were rebuilding the wall. The laborers who carried the loads worked with one hand and held a weapon with the other. So what does that tell us? That this idea of having a mind to work means we understand that we're going to deal with opposition. It means we're not going to be distracted by that opposition, even if that opposition comes from the people, if you will, sitting on the pew next to us. That the work is too important. But it also means that we have to realize that sometimes we have to work with, if you will, a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other. Now, what does that mean for us? It means that we have to be ready to do the work of encouragement and building each other up, but we also have to be ready to defend ourselves against things that are trying to come in that are, false teaching, bad influences on the church, bad influences on just Christians as a whole. This whole idea of is that Nehemiah realized, I can't stop every rumor, I can't stop every whiner, I can't send people out and defeat all these enemies. We have work to be done here. He said we had to have a plan. So he splits the people up by families and says, some of you are going to have to work while these guys have their faces to the wall. You have your back to them, so you're seeing what's going on. Tells us that we have to look out for each other. Tells us that our work within the church is about glorifying God. It's about getting God's work done. But it also means that we're going to have to carry the burden for each other once in a while. We're going to have to watch out for each other once in a while. And if we see somebody who's being attacked, we need to be the one to run there and be their support. Be ready to say, I see you're dealing with this struggle. I'm here to fight this fight with you. That's what these people were doing. They had a tool in one hand and a weapon to fight off the enemy in another. Charles Spurgeon, great theologian, a guy I don't agree with on a lot of his theology, but he's a great writer. He had a magazine that he published in the 1860s called A Sword and a Trowel, based on this idea. sword and a trowel, the idea is you got your weapon in one hand and your tool to rebuild in the other. That is a great image of what it really means to live the Christian life, is that we have to be ready to defend ourselves, and not necessarily physically defend ourselves, but we have to be willing to defend the truth, willing to defend what God wants us to stand for. But we also have to be ready to do the work. We can't always be in a defensive posture. I've been around congregations who their whole mindset was, we can't let false teaching in here. We have to stand our ground on the truth. We have to make sure that the truth is being taught here every week. That's great. That's right. That's correct. That's admirable. But you have to have a tool in the other hand. You have to be willing to do the work. It can't just be defend the truth. It also has to be share the truth and take the truth out to the people around us. We have to be willing to fight with one hand, but also work with the other. Okay, I'm going to stop for this week right there. Any thoughts, any comments about what we've discussed tonight, or anything else? We're still recording. We'll turn the recording off in just a minute. Any comments?
So I had one, Clint. I really appreciated, and as we were reading in chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, in when he says, "Hear, O God, for we are despised," right after he's kind of heard this mocking. I know that punctuation came a lot later in the Bible. They didn't have quotation marks and periods in the original language. But I thought it was interesting that this reads more like a journal entry or a private prayer rather than something that he's saying in front of the people. And I love that insight into Nehemiah's thinking. You know, I was thinking, I used to journal a lot, and I always liked putting prayers in my journal as well. And almost you get that feeling here as well.
Yeah. Because I mean, it doesn't say, and as we see some places where it says, "And I prayed to the Lord my God," or what, it just says, "Listen, God, here's what's happening," and it does. It seems very personal.
Yeah, he's just pouring out his heart. I love that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording, and then you might want to have some other thoughts.
Thanks a lot, Clint. Very nice lesson. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Let me see.
Good to see you all.
Oh, where's my recording?